Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Reelscene podcast with me, Simon Hunter, and we continue our adventure and discovery of the bizarre and mad world of independent film with guests and tips and advice so you can head out into that great, exciting world and make your first feature film. This evening, I'm delighted to be joined by a good friend of mine and an extremely prolific independent film producer who has done more films than I care to remember, Mike Riley, who joins us this evening. Mike, how many films have you done as an independent producer?
It feels
I
like about
couldn't add them up.
500, possibly 500, it feels like, but I think only 33.
I mean, that's an pretty impressive. There's not many independent producers in the UK who've got that sort of track record, I have to say. It's pretty impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's taken a while. I'm now um, in my late 50s, and I started making Super 8 movies when I was 13. So, you do the maths. It's taken that time in between to amass that. Yeah, I kind of started around about the time you started, I think, Simon. We were all shooting
Yeah,
on
back
film
in
and
the 90s, the late 90s.
yeah.
So what we try and do on this podcast is try and just give people, filmmakers who want to get into this crazy world, the world of, as you once told me, which was great advice, I think a few weeks ago, you said it's the only industry where you make something for 10 and you sell it for 5. That world, just to give filmmakers advice and tips and help, and also to sort of make them think they're not alone when some huge problem comes up and they think, oh Christ, why is that a massive problem for me and no one else, but it usually is for everybody else. So, I sort of we wanted to sort of get in your head a little bit and pick your brain. Where are we today with independent film in the world? A lot of people are despairing, they're fearing AI, they're fearing this, they're fearing that, but I can't remember a time when there hasn't been depression and the world's ended and there is no film industry.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's always some crises. I think, the great thing about this business is that it's very kind of project orientated, individual per project. We tend not to make franchises in this country. We're in the sort of in the business of prototypes. So, if you make one clinker, just the next one round might be amazing, and vice versa, which is quite good. It's quite encouraging. It's a weird thing that we don't do more franchises. Why hasn't there been Full Monty 2? I don't know. Probably people who know more about it than I do will be able to tell you the answer. I'm trying to make the odd sequel, but where are we with indie film? Not in the. I don't know about the world. All I know about is the UK. Each
Fairly
territory.
similar, isn't it? It doesn't. Each territory has got its own ups and downs, but generally the Western
Yeah,
world is
yeah.
fairly
I'm not
similar.
so worried about AI, to be honest. Maybe that's because I'm two-thirds into my career, but I think there are advantages to it. I think it's highly untested. I'm developing a animation at the moment, which will have quite a big effect on making it cheaper, making it something that more people will be able to try, which, as we've seen through the sort of digital revolution, is not necessarily a great thing. It clogs up the distribution flow, but it gives everybody a good chance to have a go. When I first started my first feature, I think there were 30 other films made that year in the UK. What is there now? Like 10 times that? If you include
Yeah,
all the low budget ones.
absolutely. I mean, it's the growth. When I talk to Elliot at Rain Dance, and he's telling me the amount of submissions of feature films and short films is astronomical. It's nowadays. I remember a friend of mine made a really good short film a few years back, 3 or 4 years ago, and it was really good and went into a few film festivals, and he was really shocked it didn't open any doors for him. I think he was really, and I think that's something. I think if you know that as an independent filmmaker, then it's okay, and I think we need to be honest about that as producers and filmmakers. And I think then you go into it not thinking, oh, what have I done wrong? I'm not talented. It's not for me. The cavalry ain't coming, is it, in today's world?
That's right. And I think the more that you can develop a thick skin alongside your passion, the better, the longer you'll last, and the more of a career you'll get. I've found that the people that I've met and over the years, the maxim of it's fairly easy to make a film. It's much more difficult to make a career. At what point do you call it a career as well? I know people that have made 10 films perhaps as producers, but still wouldn't call themselves a producer because they're not making a living at it.
Do you think there's any pattern to it, or is it just all just random year by year?
That's a good
I
question.
think that's, you know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would say though, and I say this if I'm teaching at various unis and stuff, is what's really key, I think, to carving out a career is giving yourself a skill that's transferable and that you can apply to various different types of films. My skill was that, apart from being a huge film buff, was that I was a line producer to start with. I was a director as well, and realised I would be a mediocre director. I directed a couple of TV movies and realised, my forte was more in logistics and production. I have underlying a universal ability to be able to break down a script and to schedule it and to budget it. That makes me employable as a producer, and that's really helpful for any budding producers out there.
I think that's really because we know other people, we know Tim Dennison and other producers, it's the same thing. And I think it is that you're trying to get three projects off the ground. There is no pattern. Everything falls through that year. Somebody says, Mike, can you come and effectively line produce this show? And off you go. You meet new people, you meet new crew, you get paid, you can pay the bills.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of stopped being a line producer about 15 years ago, um, because I'm a bit of a control freak, and I got annoyed with getting involved with the project and being asked to invest my intelligence and my creativity into something way beyond the normal remit of a line producer. And that was possibly me wanting to push it anyway and get involved with casting and script notes and distribution and festival strategy and all that. So I thought, I'm just going to jump in and call myself a producer from now on, which was great, and it worked, and I'd recommend that to other people. But it's a key thing to be able to have a sort of side hustle that you can rely on rather than waiting for your one baby to be born. For example, at the moment, I am attached to about 12 different projects at various exciting stages of development, most of them kind of in the area of being semi-log jammed, waiting for a big cast member to come on board in order to unlock the finance.
Do you think you're any better at guessing which of those will hit the finishing line?
Yeah, yeah.
Just
How?
wise. Is that knowledge of independent finance, people, gut feeling?
It's gut feeling, and it's being a consumer. I watch easily a movie a day, and have done since I was 12. And I know what gets out there, what gets seen, what gets reviewed well, what kind of distribution one can expect from that kind of movie. And my taste is really, really wide. I love low budget horrors, big budget stuff. We were just talking about Mission Impossible, that stuff. I love European cinema and Eastern cinema, black and white, silent movies, all the way through to Dune 2, and it's knowing where what you're doing fits into that sort of rainbow, so you can predict what might happen, what might not, where do you think it's going to go. And normally you're kind of right, and I'm sure you like the same when you read a script and you kind of project it forward, not just in terms of how difficult it's going to make, how it be to make, how much it's going to cost, but
But
all
what
that
it's going to be
stuff,
like?
the whole life of it.
I find that a very it's a very interesting bit of the filmmaking process, and you read a script. I mean, I've been attached to stuff, and you read it, and you think, oh God, it's that's what that film is. Crap, not very muddled, fantastic, a great read, funny, whatever your feeling is, and this is something I'd like you to comment on. Sometimes that film does go into production. There is no rule that the best scripts go into production. I've never seen that
No.
to myself. You'd like to think that, but sometimes people just somehow connect with something and the money turns up. And you go through the whole process of making the film, all the stuff that we go through, the wars and the battle and the arguments, and can we have more money, and we're over budget, and lenses and cameras and grading and music and politics and all that crap. And you get right to the end, and then the lock off and the editing and screaming at each other, and it should be this way or that way. And then when you finish the whole thing, by and large, it kind of resembles the thought when you first read it, isn't it? And you've just gone through all that stuff where you've convinced yourself it's terrible, amazing, great, whatever, but it is just still that.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah. I
find
mean,
that, or is that
you're right. I mean, there's a certain kind of alchemy, that happens that you can't predict when an actor says a certain line, or there's, just something that comes together in the post that you go like, wow, I didn't expect to see that.
magic?
But yeah, by and large, what your instincts tell you on the first read is more or less what the film ends up being. And I think, I learned some big lessons along the way. of attachment regarding projects and knowing how to be totally passionate about each one and caring like it's your firstborn for each one, seeing it through the best you possibly can all the way through, and then not taking it personally if it doesn't work. That's really key because I think a lot of people kind of put their all into it and maybe work for 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 years on a project, which for whatever reason, might or might not work. They can't get back up again. It's quite a kick. So I think, that sort of ability to be able to accept defeat but move on to the next one is quite important. I'm getting quite a lot of feedback, by the way.
Okay, so listen, let's. I mean, one of your early films, I was seeing Elliot. Funny enough, was one of your early films was Boston Kickout, Paul Hills's film. Back in the film day, which you made, I think, for Winchester Films. If you were jumping back to the Mike Riley of those days, or which is basically, independent filmmakers coming into this business all blue, not knowing what to do. What are you going to say to them? What's the things, genre? What sort of genres should they be looking at? Advice, should they be doing multiple projects at one time? What's the
Yeah,
where would you start if you were, because imagine you'd do your whole career all over again in different ways. So if you, with the knowledge that you have,
yeah. I don't know. I don't think I would actually change that much, Simon, to be honest. I think
because it's
I was,
feeling your way. You mean you've just got
yeah,
to
I
do
was
it.
really naive. All I knew is that somehow I wanted a career in the film business. I came from Nottingham and this was pre Shane Meadows, nobody that I didn't know anyone who even knew about how to get into film. But I was determined to do it whichever way. So I did my English degree and started doing a bit of, short films and stuff. Yeah, I mean, actually, Boston Kickout was such a good example. It's a really good film.
It really was a great film, and it was
One of my
really,
favourite
in
things.
those days, it was bloody hard to make those films,
It
much harder than
was.
now.
It was. We ran out of money. It was really ambitious. We shot all over the place for tuppence halfpenny. And it worked out really well. And Paul's a really talented guy. And like I said, in those days, there were very few films out there, so we did pretty well on the festival circuit and stuff, and got reasonable distribution. But in those days, same as now, it's very dominated by the Americans, and it was very hard to make some money on that. Made some international sales, but yeah, no. In terms of my talking to my younger self, I wouldn't change how I was. It's about the passion, Simon. It's about this kind of blind faith that you've got in the form, and that things will work out somehow. My key thing is, like, in order to make that happen, you've got to have a lot of things to do. Like, give yourself plenty of projects. Don't just concentrate on one or two. There's 24 hours in the day. You can crack on and do a lot of work in that time, but make sure you're covered. If you don't come from money, that you've got some sort of side hustle somehow, and just trust in your own taste. I think is quite an important thing. But we're so data led now. We're so into sort of our own personal algorithm as to
Hmm.
what the right thing to do would be, and what are we all about. And I think that, you just follow your feelings, you follow your gut about what you'd like to see, what you imagine other people might want to see, what's kind of like 75% predictable, 25% unpredictable, because that ratio for me, without sounding too algorithmic about it, tends to be something I've noticed that works. Don't be too original, but don't be too reductive and unoriginal.
Experimental.
Yeah, and with that, those two things, you can probably get a career going.
Mm.
But it wasn't the old days where fewer things were around, and not everybody could afford to make a film because it was all shot on film. So distribution is a different deal now, I think, as was then. But it's just keeping that energy going, doing lots and meeting lots of people and
Mm.
pressing the flesh. I teach a bit here and there, and I've got a few sort of mentees that I deal with, and one of my key things to them is, like, get out and talk to people in the flesh. Don't be sending emails and doing WhatsApp chats and doing too many Zooms and all that sort of stuff. It's you make such a bigger impression if you're actually sat in a room and you're
Meet
saying,
them.
this stuff. I really want to know. Please, can I have 10 minutes of your time? Stuff like that really lands with people.
Mm.
Certainly does for me and everybody that I talk to. And you find that most film people who are established, they want to pass on that information. They
Yeah.
want to give it back a bit.
I do. I think that's really on that one. I think I've met so many filmmakers and they're so worried to call people like yourself. And I'm always tell them, and Mike will give you 50 minutes of his time. I know so many independent producers who will, they're in between projects. They've just been through the war themselves. They will give you time. Don't aim
Yeah.
low, aim high. Call people up.
Yeah, if you can get a hold of them, then do. And you'd be surprised how giving people are. I mean, don't take the mickey, don't keep stalking, but even really big names, I've made friends with some of the biggest British directors around. Let me give you an example. Say, Ken Russell, for example. I A mate of mine was running, or is running, Oldenburg Film Festival, Torsten, and he was going to put another guest in by the name of Michael Winner, and I said, actually, Michael's good. He's done some good stuff, but I think I can find someone that's a bit more on theme with your indie Sundance of Europe style festival. So I just rang up, where was it, Ken's agent, I think, and said, this is, I'm just looking to talk to Ken about stuff, and I mentioned this festival. And Ken was the nicest man, and we became firm friends. There was a relationship that lasted 5 or 10 years, and I learned so much from him. And exactly the same was with Nicholas Rogue as well. And Nick and I went on to work together a bit, and they were like up here for me. They were so untouchable, but actually. Both of them said the same thing, which was, oh, it's really nice to talk to you, really nice to see your passion, and got time for you. Amazing how few people will actually pick up the phone and talk to us.
There's two directors who do your philosophy of producing in directing, don't they? They are absolutely listen to their voice. I want to make a film about this. Yeah, but the market says this. No one's watching this. Netflix doesn't buy that. And they just go,
Yeah,
whatever.
just
You
do it
know,
anyway.
it wasn't Netflix in their day, but it was just whatever. I'm sure it was the same. Everybody just said, no, people won't want that. You should do this. You should do that. But
Yeah,
they're iconoclasts, and that's,
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's where there's a will, there's a way, Simon. There's more people clogging up the system now than there was, but there's still most of those I think will fall by the wayside, because they may be in it for the wrong reason. They're in it for making money or the red carpet or the fame or whatever, and that comes
it's
out
not the
after a while. No, that's
that won't last long if that's your
no.
way into it. Okay, so let's just just want to deal with a couple of things before we finish. But finance, would you say to independent producers, private route pretty much completely these days? Forget industry. You'll be one of 10,000, and there'll be 10,000 people before you who are mates with the people who run the company, and blah 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 blah. Is it pointless doing that route? Would you just say find some people, get some money together, and that whatever you get, that's your movie. Off you go.
Yeah, more or less, more or less. If I'd have had to depend on the big three, Film Council, as was BFI, Film 4 and BBC Films, I wouldn't be here. I'd be doing something else. I couldn't get a career like that. I wouldn't say forget it, and it very much depends on your project. If it's something that you've noticed that the BFI does put money into, and it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see what the BFI are putting money into and what Film 4 are putting money into and BBC Films. Just look at their slate over the last couple of years and look at their releases, and you'll see the kind of things that they're doing. And if you've got a project in development that's similar to one of those, or that feels like it's got the similar sort of DNA, then by all means try it. Don't bet the farm on it. Tick those boxes, make the application, talk to who you need to talk to, and you might get lucky. It's really good to have those guys on board, obviously for many reasons, finance being one, but just general sort of seal of approval and access to markets, access to decent sales agents, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say no, forget it. I'd say that should be your first port of call. Try those three if you think they're going to fit with your project, but don't rely on it and expect to get nothing. And once probably you've got nothing, then hopefully you'll be a bit of ahead of the game because you'll be preparing your pitch to private investors, which is where most of my
What's the trick there when you meet private investors? Is it just it's like talking to actors? It's just there's no set way because everybody's different, and you just have to feel your way through it. Is it being very direct? How have you done it successfully, or is it just every time is a bit different?
it's not bullshitting too much. Everybody wants to be sold to a bit, but at the same time, that thing where everybody seems to put Blair Witch or insidious into their pitch decks as proof that their film will make money. Any investor with half a brain will see that for what it is. I think you've got to be realistic. You've got to be able to explain that there's quite a high chance that they may lose some, if not all, of their money on this project. But you'll be trying your hardest to get it back, to make the best possible piece of work at the end of it, which is marketable. You'll spend a proportion of your budget on a face because it's still about that. Even if you've only got 200 grand to spend, get somebody that will give the distributors some sort of confidence, even if it's somebody from a soap or something, and be honest with investors. I've worked with a few brokers who just lie basically in order to get their projects off the ground, and that's not the way forward. I don't subscribe to that, because it comes home to roost, that stuff, and it means you maybe make 2 or 3 films and then your reputation takes over. um, but yeah, private finance is the way to go for sure. But then the question is, where do you find those people? If you're not well connected with high net worths, then what's the form? And that's another podcast, I think.
It's another podcast. It's accountants and it's all that sort of thing. It's who can lead to who can lead to who. And just a sort of on-set way that you work. I mean, I've seen you a couple of times, and I think you work how I would probably recommend people should work, which is that you like to not get so tunneled into one thing, that you can keep an eye in that, in a big, broad perspective way of being a producer on set. And I think people sometimes, I've seen other producers not do that, and they tunnel into minutiae and this and that, whereas surely it's probably, in a way, the producer's job is, in a funny way, although it's different, it's a bit like the director's job, which is, it's the overall, it's everything, as opposed to tunneling into one thing.
Yeah,
Is that,
you're right. And it's literally keeping an eye on the big picture, isn't it? It's
are
knowing
you telling the story?
yeah, and what's going to count eventually and what's not going to count. And that comes with a bit with experience, but just common sense as well, doesn't it, really? It's kind of knowing that, if you're squirreling away in the corner on this tiny detail, the bigger stuff will go by the wayside, and that's what will count. But once you've sort of shepherded a few films through both the shoot, which is, let's face it, a very minor part of the whole process in terms of time. It's intense and it's expensive, but in terms of the time it takes to make a movie, it's the sort of smallest part of it. Once you've done that and then shepherded a few through into post-production and crucially into the beauty pageants for sales agents and then festivals and distribution, you learn pretty quickly which are the wars to fight and which ones to let go. One of my key things, I'm not just saying this because you're a director and I enjoy working with you, but it's to trust your director and to trust the people that you work with. That's what directors say about actors, that 90% of directing is in the casting. You cast the right people to play those parts, and then you just guide them gently as you go. And I think the same is exactly true with a producer. You've got to trust your HODs, you've got to trust your writer and your composer, but most of all, you've got to trust your director. I don't think I've ever done a film where I haven't really allowed the director just to get on with it. And if the rushes are coming back with one or two particularly, let's say, questionable aspects, then it might have a word, but it's quite gentle. Because
It's amazing. I think of Neil Marshall doing Hellboy a couple of years back, and the producers came in, the sort of big Hollywood guys came in and fired his DP, and you think, what is the purpose of that? I mean, just as a macho thing, I mean, you just literally, your left-hand person, the person that you need that shorthand with, that gives you comfort, makes it the process quicker every day because you have that synergy, and you just do this kind of, oh, we're in charge, we can, it just, come on, it's your film as well, you're.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I know. There's all sorts of pitfalls, but micromanagement is a big pitfall that should be avoided. But it's fun to shoot. It's great, and it's hard when you don't shoot for a while. I know people. It's like a drug. People get withdrawal symptoms if actors or writers or producers or whoever just don't get to do a movie for a few years, which is very normal, isn't it? Between
Very, yeah.
yeah,
And then you just suddenly, it comes to you and it's just like, oh God, 2 days of doing it. I mean,
yeah,
you find you just go, oh, can we just start again? Because we're just starting to get the
yeah,
groove back. It's not
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
weird, it's a weird thing. And lastly, really, distribution. Do you think that producers should a lot of people sort of think that you should sort of start at the end bit. You should see a sales company, say, "Look, hi, I'm Mike. I'm going to do a zombie film in London with what's her name from EastEnders in it. Here's the script. What do you think I can get sales wise, and work back from that? Or do you think forget it because nobody knows anything, just get the maximum amount of money to make it look as good as you can?" I mean, do you subscribe to that sort of reverse engineering thing, or is it rubbish?
It depends on the project. My sensible side and my ultra professional producer side says, reverse engineer it. Always talk to sales agents. I know a lot of them, and think about where it's going first, and then how much it should cost and what it should be after that. Then my kind of film buff side goes, well, it's going to lack the magic, isn't it? It's going to lack that something special that really unique films have that probably would never have been made if their creatives had started with distributors and said, "What would you like to see? What do you think audiences want to see and hear?" So there isn't a rule one way or the other, Simon, on that. I think if I wanted to make movies that made money only, well, I don't think I'd be doing it. To be honest, it's not my thing. Maybe porn. That's the best way to make loads of money. Actually, that's not the case anymore, is it? But or commercials or something. I've never got into commercials.
That's their budgets are completely different these days,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're still demanding the same. So that world has changed. Are there any genres that people are more commercially still more appealing? First time producers want to get their hands dirty with a project, try it out, learn the ropes a bit. What would you say? Still genre stuff? Still your
Yeah,
horror movies?
yeah, it's weird that, isn't it? We could have had this
Mm.
conversation 20 years ago or
20
30.
years ago, yeah.
Yeah, it's horror, especially as a genre that you don't need names in particularly, as long as you've got a concept that sells on a poster that looks suitably, derivative, and you probably get some kind of distribution out of it. And it's so saturated, that market. It's so saturated, but I've made lots of them, and some have worked and some haven't. There's no guarantee of anything. But I think obviously when you're starting, you want to get your feet under the table. You want to get something on your CV. So yeah, that's not a bad shout. Um, Certainly easier to make than say a good comedy. I still want to make a really good comedy, and that usually
I
ends up
think if you can find a writer, stroke writer director who can do that,
yeah,
it's so. I mean, it's just God's gift to independent production, isn't it? Because you don't need to kill the world on resources and logistics. It's about once you've got that good script, you got to cast it well and give them enough time to do it. And
yeah,
there it is.
very hard to find the
But
script.
bloody hard, but
Yeah,
very hard.
yeah, because it gets sucked up by TV, and all the great comedy writers work for TV, understandably. It just doesn't seem to happen in indie film world that there's great rip roaring comedies or just really smart comedies. One of my kind of thinking about favorite British movies probably are Python movies and Withnail because they're kind of like unique.
I mean, Holy Grail was almost independently kind of movie, wasn't it? I mean, they didn't have much
Yeah,
money. They had a few 100,000. It was in the, when it was 73, 74, something, off they went to Scotland, and it's very low budget and,
yeah.
you know, but, has the talent and the script and the people.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was a real kind of golden era for British movies. The handmade gold press time. I don't know if that'll ever come back, actually. I think TV's taken over quite a lot. I'm a bit of a snob. I really like films. I watched less television. I've only done a couple of TV things. One was really big and was very informative for me.
What is it about film that is it the event? Is it the way they're made? Is it the visual nature of them? The group audience experience?
Yeah, it's all of that, isn't it? It's all of that, and it's that sense that personally, I like a story that's as Hitchcock said, that's in relation to the endurance of the human bladder. I like an hour and a half to 2 hours being told a story that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and you come out satisfied, hopefully in some way or another, and that's it. You've got that as a unit of experience, like reading a book or looking at a
Yeah.
painting or reading a poem or something. Whereas I think with TV, and I'm sounding particularly kind of dinosaur-y here saying this, but it's just me because I don't watch much TV. But I don't respect formats so much that can just continue on forever, as long as the ratings are holding on. And I think the best TV that I've seen are the ones that have a beginning, middle, and end. They're just stretched over maybe a six-parter
Yeah.
or a ten-parter or something.
They were just intended to be that and no more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They haven't sort of sold out and just continued to repeat themselves. But just personally, I like movies. I don't know if it's an anti TV thing. I just like being told a story. I like there to be a parameter to my story, and I don't have the time, to be honest, or the commitment to
No.
spend binging.
Being an independent producer and binge watching Netflix shows or Prime shows, it's just, there's just not enough time. You've got to use the evenings for whatever, reading scripts usually, probably, or
Yeah, yeah,
script
and just
development.
reading books as well, and doing stories and getting involved with storytelling in some form. But yeah, watching a film a day, I think, is a good habit to get into.
Yeah,
Watching,
and
watching
from
more.
all decades as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Not just new stuff, but learn your craft, learn the
Yeah, yeah.
history of your craft.
I think people forget that with older films, just because the costumes, the acting style, the staginess. There's also take away the ideas of what they're doing.
Yeah,
What's clever and what they're not doing and what they are doing and what they're
yeah,
thinking about.
yeah,
It's
yeah. Do you have a favorite film?
no, it changes all the time. Do you know what I always like? I always think that the directors I like, the Edgar Wrights and Neil Marshalls and all these sort of people, they're always social mediaing about films that other people might go, oh, why do you like that? That was a bit of a sloshy film from the 70s, and yet something about it spoke to them that was cool, and I always kind of liked that because that's how, I mean, I feel that with a lot of films. I saw Juggernaut again the other day with Richard Harris and Anthony Hopkins in a movie I really liked as a kid, and watched it get set on a boat with bombs, and it's all the things you could criticize it to death, but sometimes those things, there's always something in them that's kind of cool and
Yeah,
great, and it depends the movie, and doesn't it change from decade to decade what you
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you
I
know
grew up. I grew up with like films like Capricorn One. I loved Capricorn One when I was a kid.
I've seen Capricorn one about, I don't know, I daren't think how many times, but it's got to be close to 50 actually. It's one of my favourite
Yeah, I
all-time
mean,
films. There's a great scene there with, and I posted it actually when he died a few years back when Hal Holbrook died, when he meets O.J. Simpson and
yeah,
uh, yeah, what's his name? Who's the lead? Brubaker, and he says this great speech about why they have to fake the Mars landings. Fantastic! It's great
yeah,
actor.
yeah. Because you buy it, don't you? You kind of feel sympathy for the man, even though he represents the devil. Yeah, no,
Yeah, yeah.
great films, great films. But
Peter
yeah,
Hyams. God
yeah,
bless him.
yeah.
So listen, Mike, I won't take up your time and thank you. It's been fascinating. Is there any last bit of advice? Because actually, the one piece of advice you said, it's interesting, which is basically listen to your voice. If you look at Spielberg when he got the Lifetime Achievement Award, and he said, my advice to young filmmakers today is exactly that. He said, be quiet enough because it will whisper to you, that voice. It won't shout, it'll just whisper. And he said the hardest thing of being a filmmaker is holding on to an idea when no one else around you gets it. And you think, and I remember thinking, and that's Spielberg. When you imagine everybody goes, yes, sir, that's an amazing idea. And when you're nobody, it's even harder.
Mm.
But that's what he said. And you imagine, once it's done and everybody's seen it and the audience likes it, it's kind of easy and you kind of see why. But at the beginning, it's bloody hard. So apart from that voice, what one piece of advice would you give to indie producers coming up?
Just know your craft. I'm very surprised at how few, even quite established people, but up and coming producers and filmmakers, how little they know about film history. I think it's all part of living and breathing being a filmmaker. It's to know what's come before, because then you're understanding your position in the pantheon, and to understand what kind of movies have been made before. Then you'll make them yourself. You match that with your taste, i.e., your inner voice. You'll be a serious professional. You'll be taken seriously. But know where you sit in all of this. Know what's happened before. Know what's happened in British cinema since 1895 onwards. It's really important, that kind of stuff. You have to be a nerd to do this job. It's not like something that is just you pick up and drop and you leave and you don't do it at the weekends. You live it and breathe it. And that comes from knowing it inside out and knowing who the costume designer was on The Lady Killers, going back like that, having that kind of nerdy kind of understanding. And I know you're a nerd, Simon, and up with the nerd.
But I remember going to BAFTA with a talk by John Box, who was the production designer on Lawrence Arabia. And I remember talking to him afterwards. He was so nice and was telling me about how he put the camel track, the line that when Omar Sharif comes out of the Mirage and they're shooting on a, I don't know, 700mm lens or something, and he put this little camera took him ages to do it, so that your eyesight in this huge, big 65mm, anamorphic frame is drawn right to the bit where it wants to see this little.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. And telling me about David Lean panicking that it was too long, and he cut it back for the original theatrical release in 1962. He said, for the rest of his life, he was gutted that he'd done it. He'd lost his confidence. Somebody like that, a director with that, and David Lean was not a man lacking in confidence. Yeah, and he worried and did it, and he put it back in the 1989 re-release of that movie.
That's the thing, you see. People like you, we like all these anecdotes because it's meaningful. It's not just like a fun thing to know being a geek. It's actually relevant to what we do on a day-to-day basis because we can draw upon it on set. Because that moment of in that case, that moment of worry that you've spent 2 years in the desert or whatever, 5 weeks making Boston Kick Out or whatever you've done, you will have that panic when you're locking that cut. Should we keep it in or should we not? And the panic bit, the worry, the risk-free bit where you're going to kick something out that's a bit odd or unusual or edgy, you can learn from that. You think, well, they went through that even on this war horse of a movie. Yeah. They had the same feelings. Yeah. I often think, I'll leave you in a second, but I often think of a story that I was told by the grip of American Werewolf in London. I was talking to him, we were making a movie, I was trying to get him to be on board, and it didn't work out because he got another job, but he told me about a time when they were shooting the cinema sequence in Piccadilly Circus, and Westminster Council wouldn't give them permission to close the whole thing down, quite understandably really. So they'd staged crashes or stunt cars on all the roads leading into there, which gave them like an hour to shoot before the police turned up and moved them all on. And it was like a Sunday night or something. It was the quietest possible time at 3 a.m. or something. I'm paraphrasing, but they got all these shots. I watched American Werewolf again the other night and just broke down that sequence of which shots they got and how they got them. And, they were flying around. There was multiple units going and
screaming at each other. Go.
And stuff like that informs when I make a film, because I remember that. And I think, well, if they could do it that way, I could do it that way and get away.
Hitchcock did it outside the United Nations. He wasn't allowed to shoot there on North by Northwest. And he turned up in an ice cream van and had the camera there and shot, Cary Grant wandering in. And he just shot it out of a flipping ice cream van and they shot it. They got away with it. That was probably the biggest VistaVision movie for MGM that year. It was
No, I shot a gunfight at the end of Stansted Runway once without any permission. But you do, you get it done, and you figure out ways of doing it. And it's just good to know these little stories because it gives you confidence to be able to achieve things. I'm not recommending to your listeners that they go and fire guns in airports, by the way, but I'm just using it as an example to show what you can do.
Millions of people getting arrested after the podcast. Mike, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it. You can look at Mike's big... what's next for you? What's the next... You don't know. It could be anything. Probably Jake West's Feral, maybe. That's the werewolves on a plane. That would be...
I'd love to do that.
That would be cool.
Jake's great. That hopefully, but other things as well. Some possible Welsh things, and I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
Thank you so much for your time, Mike. Good to see you. Thank you very much, and thank you to our listeners. It was great to chat with Mike, and I hope that's given you some inspiration and help and guidance. Dive in there, get it done, make something, learn, listen to your voice, move on, do the next one. Thank you so much for joining us on Reelscene. I'm Simon Hunter. We'll see you again shortly. Thank you. Bye-bye.